Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello students, welcome back to the lecture series on women's writing, and today's topic is related to the names of the women writers. So I have given the title of this lecture as What's in a Name. This is a famous line written by William Shakespeare, and of course all of us knows that when Shakespeare is writing something, he means something much more than the written words. So this is not only a question, this is a rhetorical question. Is there something very important in a name? Is it something that will influence the writers? Is it something that will influence the readers? Because if there is a literary work and the author's name is written at the bottom of it, for example, XYZ work by ABC author, what is the significance of that particular structure? So all of those things will be associated to women's writing in this lecture, and we will learn what implications, what significances these might carry. So moving on to our first slide, we have talked about in this particular slide about 19th century women writers, especially the British women writers, because they are the ones who started writing in English to begin with. And English, as you know and as all of us are aware, is a language which reached many parts of the world, and it is by far the most popular language in many countries other than French and German, and if we consider the population of China, then Mandarin is the maximum spoken language, but English is not far from that target. It is spreading every day, and it is becoming a kind of lingua franca. So women writers who are writing in this language, their words were spreading along with the language. Where English went, the words of these women writers also went. And therefore today in India we are also studying about these women writers. So to begin with, I have also given subtitle to this slide, that is anon. Anon over here, this used to be the most common of expressions used to denote the anonymity of a writer. That is, suppose there is a poem and we do not know who has written that poem, but that poem is very popular and it is published somewhere. So who do we ascribe the poem to? Who is the author of the poem? If we do not know it, we use this expression as anon. The full form of anon is anonymous, that is, the name is not known by anybody. This is, as you can see, way of indicating that the author is unknown. The first time there was any mention of a woman writer was for Jane Austen. When she published her first novel, that is Sense and Sensibility, it was printed that the novel was written by a lady. So her name was not mentioned by the publisher. Whoever undertook the project of publishing the novel written by Jane Austen, whom we read very well, whom we read all throughout the world, whose novels are taken into consideration for BA syllabus, MA syllabus prescribed by the UGC, you will see that this popular author, when she published her novel for the first time, her name was not mentioned. It was only mentioned by a lady. Thereafter, when he published Pride and Prejudice. In the place of the author's name, it was written Writer of Sense and Sensibility. Again, her name was missing. So, all the novels she wrote during her lifetime and which got published later on never had her name on it. Only after her death, when the novels became very popular, the readers' requests were met, the readers' demands were met with the publication of her name. Moving on to the next point, the early novels. This is not only something which happened to Jane Austen. This happened to Maria Edgeworth, Anne Radcliffe, Frances Burney and Mary Shelley. Out of all these authors, we are very much familiar with Mary Shelley's work, that is Frankenstein. Many Gothic novels, many horror stories and many modern time fables have drawn inspiration from Frankenstein. And Mary Shelley wrote that, but it did not contain her name for the first time when it was published. So, here we see another list of women authors who were famously known as the Bronte sisters. And these authors, instead of taking their own name, they started publishing with a pseudonym. What is a pseudonym? Let me tell you. A pseudonym is very akin to a pen name. That is, you are hiding your own identity and you are sending your literary works to the publisher under a fictitious identity. These pseudonyms were male names or which belong to the names which belong to the masculine gender, usually associated to the masculine gender. Because why did they take this kind of position? Why did they try to hide their own identity? The same, at that point of time when these people were writing, when Jane Austen was writing, Gaskell was writing, Edgeworth and Mary Shelley was writing, women were not considered as writers at all. And we will discuss this in the upcoming slides. So, just let us take a look at the Bronte sisters. There were 3 sisters. Originally there were 5, 2 of them died. These 3 sisters, right from their very childhood, they practiced writing, because not only you become perfect by writing, but also you try to gain experience more and more in that field if you want to perfect yourself. So, practice is very necessary for that. And these sisters, they shared their writings with each other and they gave critical commentaries to each other. So, that is how they influenced each other's writings as well. And the collective pool of knowledge and creativity increased day by day. That is how these 3 sisters, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte and Anne Bronte, they became very famous novelists. But very funny thing over here is that they had to publish under male pseudonyms. For Charlotte Bronte, we have Currer Bell. For Emily Bronte, we have Alice Bell. And from Anne Bronte, we have Acton Bell. These works made them immortal. Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, all of these works comprised of the composite fame they got as authors, and none of the readers knew that they were women writers. So, as you see, 1816, 1818, 1820, this was the early 19th century. That is the condition of the women authors in the early 19th century. They had to hide their femininity, their female self, their female mind and their female consciousness under male pseudonyms. They were not allowed to express their identity as women, because otherwise their works, whether they have the merit of standing at their own, whatever the chances are, everything will be demolished once it is known to the publisher as well as the public that they are females who are writing these novels. Now we see what was the reaction. Is it originally that they did not want to give their names, or is there some other factors which made them do so? There is always the way of the world. It gets to people. When we influence, when we express ourselves, when we express our desires, there is always an opposing factor, and these opposing factors, either we can resist these factors or we can bow down to it momentarily or permanently. So these external factors which made the women writers change their decision has been discussed in brief with the example of Robert Southey. And as you can see, he was a poet laureate. It is the highest honor that can be given to a poet in Britain at that time. That poet is the court poet of the king, of the monarchy that is still persisting till this date. At that time, monarchy was very much in power, and they used to give this kind of position to the best poet of the country, and that poet was Robert Southey. He held that position from 1813 till 1843. At 1843, Robert Southey died. So, from 1813, he held the position of Poet Laureate of England to 1843. Why are we talking about him suddenly? Because Charlotte wrote a letter to Southey before publishing her works. She wrote a letter with some poems included in it. She wanted that Robert Southey, being the poet laureate, will understand the merit of the poems, maybe will help her publish them. But what happened? Let's see. On March 12, 1837, Charlotte Bronte received a letter, a reply from Robert Southey. On this particular date, she got the letter, and instead of her spirits getting uplifted, she felt heavily demoralized. Why? Because these were the lines which were included in the letter. Literature cannot be the business of a woman's life, and it ought not to be. The more she is engaged in her proper duties, the less leisure she will have for it, even as an accomplishment and a recreation. So here there are two arguments that Robert Southey gives to Charlotte Bronte. He says that, one, she is engaged in her proper duties, that is the place of women. By proper duties, of course, it is intended that she become a wife, a mother, and an educator for her children, do the household work, and of course attend social functions, represent the house that she is married to. All comes under the title of proper duties. Once she is engaged in doing all those proper duties, she will have, this is the other part of the argument, the less leisure she will have for it, even as an accomplishment and a recreation. Even if she is trying to accomplish herself as a poet, or it's only a matter of recreation, only a matter of hobby, whatever her reasons are for writing poetry, she will not get time for it. That is what ought to be. This is not something Southey wanted. Literature cannot be the business of women's life. Literature cannot be related to the women's natural self. Her natural self is given to reproductivity, to raising children, to organizing the household. All of these parts of life are the integral parts of life for women, and the domain of literature should always be left aside. So, this heavily discouraged Charlotte, and she is the eldest of all the sisters, and she took the decision to try to blend in the crowd of the writers, because most of the writers were males at that time, and in order to become a known person among that kind of crowd, you also have to become a male. But there was also some moments when they received help from the society. Her publisher was George Smith. He published most of the works written by Charlotte and Emily. And when George Smith, he never met these two young women. He wanted to meet the writers, and he also did not know that they were women. So the first time he invites these two women to his party, which was thrown by him. Of course, he is a publisher, he is going to throw parties and invite the authors, the contributors to his company and to his publications. All the authors gather, and when he sees who this Currer Bell and Ellis Bell are, this is his reaction. He was extremely surprised to find two gawky, ill-dressed country girls paralyzed with fear, who, to identify themselves, held out the letters addressed to Messrs. Acton, Currer and Ellis Bell. Acton here is Anne Bronte, and she did not attend the party. She was ill at that time, but Charlotte and Emily attended the party. When George Smith saw that instead of two grave-looking men, two gawky little women who are not dressed properly for the party, who does not know what kind of lavishness the author's life comprised of at that time, especially such popular authors, he was surprised that these women have written these wonderful novels. Charlotte has written Jane Eyre, and Emily Bronte has written Wuthering Heights. And these two novels are very popular, the best sellers of that time. And that made George Smith bow down with respect, and she also invited them to his own house, introduced them to his mother, and gave enough respect to them, and showed enough respect to them as accomplished authors. We take another very prominent English writer. She was a novelist, a journalist, an essayist. She wrote fiction as well as non-fiction. Her name is George Eliot. The sentence, her name is George Eliot, is very ambiguous. George Eliot is a male name. Everybody thought it to be the same. Only her name is Marianne Evans, English novelist. She wrote an essay called Silly Novels by Lady Novelists. By the time George Eliot or Mary Ann Evans was writing, she already had the notion that there were many women writers who were writing by their own name, and those writings did not carry any worth. They did not address serious social matters or political matters. They contained romances and comedies and sitcoms. Whatever the genre was, those writers represented something which is superficial. And these are the points which were included in the essay, because the lady novelists, what they were doing at that time were undermining women's education. So in those writings, as George Eliot points out, that intellectuality was limited to the superficial level. Here and there we could see that the characters in such novels are showing some kind of witticism and showing some kind of wit and less of wisdom. This is creating a bad impression in the mind of the reader that, okay, you can take the lady novelists' books for reading during the leisure time, but you cannot treat them as historical tracts. You cannot treat them as important political treatises. You cannot take them as representatives of the social evils, the exploitation, the domination. Nothing of that sort is written in those works by lady novelists which George Eliot quotes in her essay. Next, educated female characters, superficially witty, not independent. The characters I was talking about in those novels which were written by the lady novelist, those characters were not independent. They were very dependent on the male characters of the novel. They were intellectually dependent, they were mentally dependent, and also at times physically dependent. Serious works by women are discredited, dismissed by male reviewers due to the reputation created by such novelists. So, whenever you are reading, the audience is reading a work of literature and they are finding it funny, they are finding it witty, but it is not giving them anything insightful about the society. And if there is a writer who is writing about the evils of the society, that person is also treated lightly, because that is the public opinion, that is how the image of the women writers have reached the crowd. So, George Eliot says that this is the practice and that is why women writers are not taken seriously, and that is why Mary Ann Evans had to become George Eliot, for the public to take her works very seriously. Because of course George Eliot, she was a radical feminist, one of the earliest feminists, and she did not believe in the institution of marriage. She said that openly, for that she was very much criticized. She was also a political rights activist for the women, and that was also a point of criticism. This is one of the famous novels which was written by George Eliot, and it had political underlining, it had political subtexts within itself which were of very importance for the upcoming readers, for the later readers. Next we come to George Sand. She is not very popularly known to anybody rather, and her novels which were written during her lifetime were also not very much popular. They only became popular later on, and she is a French novelist. Let me tell you that first. She does not belong to the English background, and that is why her works have not been read throughout the world, but she belonged to that same era when Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters and George Eliot was writing. Her real name is Amantine Lucille Aurore Dupin. This person was a radical feminist, and we will learn about her a little later. But France, as a European country, was still experiencing what we understand by oppression of women. She did not choose the name due to some reason which we will read in this particular portion. In a small article by Matthew Thompson, we come to know that this particular person was a pioneering feminist. The author regularly wore men's clothing, smoked in public, and was unapologetic in her sexual pursuits, acts that shocked the genteel social circles through which she moved. So, this kind of shock she gave to the social circles in which she was moving, she was interacting in, created a kind of negative impact on her image. And obviously, we understand that even in England, women writers were not allowed to publish their names on the novels, and the same thing is happening in France. And England and France have been in some sort of turmoil throughout the centuries, and they have some cultural impact upon each other. But the women's condition, and maybe that is why the women's condition are same throughout. And when you see that she was a pioneering feminist, this is something which was not said about Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters. Although George Eliot take some claim to feminism, but in France we get the name of George Sand, because George Sand, that is Amantine, she not only wrote about feminism, she lived it. With her lived experiences, with her expressions, when her unapologetic sexual pursuits came to the knowledge, when she approached a male person without any kind of inhibition, people were obviously shocked out of their comfort zones. The comfort zone I am talking about has been created by the society. That is the image of the ideal woman, the angel in the house. And when you talk about an angel in the house, you must understand that it is again the social construct that has made it somewhat like that. Now we come to these genteel social circles. What is this genteel social circles? This is the one which creates the image of the angel in the house. And if you read the article, The Mad Woman in the Attic, you will find how the myth of the angel in the house has been discredited. And of course, George Sand stands as an example for that. Here you can also see this is the novel which became very famous, Indiana, published in 1832. It did not carry with itself the name of Amantine, and it was published as written by George Sand. This is another author you might be familiar with because she has written one of the earliest science fictions after, of course, Mary Shelley. And I am talking about women writers who have written science fiction. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was, of course, one of the earliest written science fiction by women writers. This is in 1915, Alice Bradley Sheldon. That is the name, the original name of James Tiptree Jr., American science fiction and fantasy novelist. So she wrote novels. For example, in 1967, Brightness Falls from the Air. There she imagines a separate planet. Many people in that planet struggling to survive, and they are inhabiting a different kind of environment. And all of these things were very popular at that time. Only the public did not know that it was being written by a woman. James Tiptree Jr., when asked about why she chose that kind of a pseudonym, she said a male name seemed like good camouflage. I had the feeling that a man would slip by less observed. I have had too many experiences in my life of being the first woman in some damned occupation. So, what she says is a man's writing would slip by very easily, will be accepted by the society very easily. A woman's writing, on the other hand, will not be taken very seriously. This is something George Eliot, I talked about George Eliot a couple of minutes ago. You can go back to the slide and have a look at it. The ideas that George Eliot already said, this is something which James Tiptree Jr. is also echoing. She is saying that the idea of hiding under a male pseudonym is that of slipping by the net, the mental net, the mental filter. The publishers have a filter on their forehead that whatever male writings come, that will go through, and whenever there is a female writer, that will not go through. So this kind of mental filter which the society has prepared for everybody, this, in order to bypass that filter, this name was suitable. And it is a very clever kind of statement on part of James Tiptree Jr., aka Alice Bradley Sheldon. Her name was included in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame in 2012 because she contributed to the genre of science fiction. We all know that science fiction is still a growing field. Whenever there is a chance for the imaginary, the creative to merge with the cold domain of science, something wonderful like science fiction takes birth, and that has been proved by Mary Shelley while she wrote Frankenstein, and that has also been proved by James Tiptree Jr. Now here I am going to talk about a woman writer called Virginia Woolf. I have already discussed Virginia Woolf before. When I will discuss her in this particular slide, I will take the references from this book called A Room of One's Own, which was published in 1929. So, this was actually not a book. It was a lecture, of course in two parts. The entire collection of the two parts was later on published as a book called A Room of One's Own. She delivered this lecture in 1928 at Newham College and Girton College, the first two colleges for women in Cambridge. So, this was the era when Cambridge was has already introduced women's education. These two colleges took the responsibility of bringing education to women, bringing formal education to women. So, let us understand what this essay contains and why is it relevant to our topic today. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. So, this is something which has been stated in that particular literary / non-literary work. I call it literary because the language is very beautiful and it has some elements of imagination, creativity and some stories as well. But it is also a non-literary work because she is delivering a lecture and talking about the condition of women, especially within the educational setup of the country. Women are not given education. Here also she talks about if Shakespeare had a sister. So, we discuss this in some other lecture. So, why does she say a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction? If she has money, she will be able to hire household help, and that way she will not be forced to do the household works, the household chores, and therefore will have some time for herself. And why a room to her own self, a room of her own? Because one needs a mental space apart from the physical space. We always have two separate places, the physical space and the mental space. But women are mostly brought up in the physical space of the house. They do not have a room where they can keep their own self, where they can keep their own belongings. Everything is shared with their male partners. When the woman is a child, that particular self has certain belongings, and that self's belongings belong to the father, to the mother, to the brother, and it is shared everywhere. She does not have a room where she can keep her secrets. She does not have a particular almirah where only her things are there. And I am talking about the 19th century England. We cannot compare this to today's world. So, if that woman grows up, instead of sharing her husband's or her spouse's room, she has a room to keep her books inside it. She has a room to sit and not be in touch with any of the people in the world, not be in connection with any of the relatives, and that's how can experience a sort of detachment. And when you detach yourself from a particular thing, you have a better view of it. It is similar to standing in line with many people on your sides. Everybody in standing in one single line. If you look at your right, you will be seeing only one person. If you look at your left, you will be seeing only one person. But if you just take a step back, or maybe you take a step forward, you will be able to view how many of the people are there in the same line. That is called detachment. And when you detach yourself, you have a better view of the situation. And that is why you need a room of your own as a woman writer. And of course, unless and until you experience that sort of detachment, your experiences will be incomplete and they will lack the touch with the reality. And in order to deal with the real life, the real world, you need to experience that as a writer. So the next thing that she writes is, I would venture to guess that Anon, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman. Right in the very first part of this lecture, I mentioned that there were some writings which were published throughout the ages which carried the initials at the bottom written by Anon. So this particular Anon over here, the anonymous writer, would often be woman, because that is how the real life is. The real life, the reality of that particular society did not expect women writers, did not expect writers who were serious about their work, who wanted not only fame and some witticism out of it, but also to spread the word of liberation, to spread the word of emancipation, to spread the experiences she alone has and wants her readers to identify with those experiences, and thereby form a kind of unity to go forward with. So this Anon, that particular writer whose name is anonymous, used to be women. That is what Virginia Woolf claims. Just because she did not wanted to write her name and thereby dilute the gravity of her work, she wrote Anon, that is anonymous. And when you write, when you hide your name, people do not consider you women. They consider, oh, it is a literary work, it must have been written by a man. She also writes another very interesting point in her lecture, which is pointed out by Grace Boswell. Each generation of women writers builds upon the successes of those who have gone before. For that to be possible, the lives of those women need to be known and their books read, studied, valued and enjoyed. So, you see that whenever a woman is writing, she is writing not only because she wants to write. Just now I mentioned that it is not because of fame, or it is not because of being known as a woman writer, but because of creating a tradition, because of creating the discourse of power, because of creating because of passing the message to the future generations that, see, this is how we live, you must strive to be better. This is how my mother lived, this is how my grandmother lived, and this is how I am living. There has been change since my grandmother. The message of change, the message of inspiration should pass on to you. And you, as the next generation woman writer, should pass on the message with bigger letters in it to your future generation. So in order to do that, we need to study the history of the women writers, what kind of experiences they have penned down in their literary works. And Grace Boswell in the article mentions that very clearly. To be possible, the lives of those women need to be known, their books read, studied, valued and enjoyed. Because women writer builds upon the successes of those who have gone before. Our success of a woman writer in the present era depends much on the women writers who she has succeeded, because she has followed the footprints of those women writers who have come and gone before her. She is now the valued member of that lineage of women writers. This again is a very interesting part of this lecture. Like I mentioned, that women writers necessarily took up male pseudonyms for two reasons. Before reading all the data given in this slide, let us just rewind a little and consider these two things. One is to hide behind the male gravity, hide behind the gravity of a male writer or the name of a male writer, and the second to appeal to the general audience, because women writers were not taken very seriously. So, they chose the male pseudonyms, and sometimes, of course, like in place of George Eliot or George Sand, they come out later and they say to the whole world that this is why we have chosen certain pseudonyms, and most of the times they remain, as Virginia Woolf said, anonymous. Only by the pressure of the audience or by the demand of the readers, the female names are made public. Here is a counter discourse, a discourse which is not expected and which is very much criticized by the public. It is okay if a woman takes a male pseudonym, but it is not okay if a male takes a female pseudonym. This is something which the society hates more than works published by women. Male authors writing under female pseudonyms. I am sure most of you will be surprised when you see the list. Before we begin talking about the list, let us talk about the purpose. What purpose does this particular act serve? What is the reason that men had to take female pseudonyms? Why did men hide under the women's names? One is the themes of their writing. Sometimes it was thought in that particular era, or maybe 100 to 100 years back from now, it was accepted by the society that men who are writing will write about the politics of the country, the grave issues of the international affairs, everything which is related to culture, economy, sociology, philosophy, all of these disciplines will come under the male authorship. So, men who are writing about the lives of women, men who are writing about the emotional side of men will not be taken seriously, because men are associated with emotions, because women are associated with emotions, men are associated with reason. But if an author tries to show the feminine side of the male persona, that author, if that author is a male, becomes problematic for the audience to accept. So, in order to write, to freely write, these authors, in order to freely write about the feminine side of men, especially in the works of Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay, we will find that there are ample references to male characters who are very much in love with the women characters, and they are making sacrifices and compromises in the family in order to make their marriage work, or in order to get married to a particular girl. And of course, you must be aware of the novel called Devdas. That is, Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay wrote the novel called Devdas, and we see the other side, the depressing side of the male personality. And of course, in today's world, a character like Devdas will be heavily criticized. But in order to make, but it is of course a part of reality, men do have that kind of side to their personality. But if it is written by another man who is supposed to champion the cause of male ego, then it becomes problematic. He wrote under the pseudonym of Anila Devi. Next, Srinivasan Rangarajan. He is a Tamil author. He wrote under the pseudonym of Sujata. He is currently the director of The Hindu. The Hindu is a very popular newspaper, I am sure you know that. He is currently serving there as the director. He also wrote under a woman's pseudonym. Benjamin Franklin. You must have heard the name Benjamin Franklin because he was a polymath, he was a philosopher, an economist, an anthropologist and what not. He was also devoted to science and invention, and of course, you will see that he is the one who drafted the United Nations Declaration of Independence. He is the one who wrote it. And when Benjamin Franklin was young, his brother was the editor of a newspaper. He was not allowed to write in that same newspaper. So he used the pseudonym of Mrs. Silence Dogwood, so that he will not be associated with the paper at all. He will also be able to conveniently explain his ideas. Mrs. Silence Dogwood, the image of this person was created that she is an aged widow and she is a good reader. She is very much up to date with the affairs of the state and gives her opinions on it. So her interactions and communications with the newspapers were considered of much intellectual value. That Benjamin Franklin was originally the writer of those letters. Next we find Achinta Kumar Sengupta. He wrote under the pen name of Niharika Devi. Achinta Kumar Sengupta is again a Bangla writer and a novelist. He took the name of Niharika Devi just for the same purpose Sarat Chandra took the name of Anila Devi. Lyman Frank Baum. You will be pleased to know that the Wizard of Oz series, which is actually a very popular children's book and has been serialized in TV serials and short films and video clips, it is kind of something which all the English speaking children see at one point of time or the other. And this series was actually written by Lyman Frank Baum. He took the pen name of Edith Van Dyne because this purpose is also different, because he was writing about children's stories and it was associated the nurturing quality of the children's moral values and the emotions. These qualities are associated with women, and that is why Lyman took the name of Edith Van Dyne to appeal to the mothers, because the mothers would go and shop for books and the mothers will know, oh, this book is written by a woman, so it must be very comfortable for my child to read, very approachable, very easy to understand for my child. So all of these notions were taken care of by simply taking the name of Edith Van Dyne. Next we come to Charles Leslie Macfarlane. The famous Nancy Drew series. It is the series where there is a detective and she solves crimes. It is very popular among teenagers. Those who are the readers of Nancy Drew series, they will be very surprised to know that it is not written by Caroline Keene, but is written by Charles Leslie Macfarlane, because Caroline Keene here is the pseudonym of this particular writer, Charles Leslie Macfarlane. Next we come to Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz, he wrote a lot of literature. He expressed a lot of literature in the form of Gothic horror, which is a very popular kind of literature, romance suspense. Again, these two kind of literature are very popular among the youth. Just because Koontz was a very prolific writer and his publisher were not able to deal with that much of work. And again, if you are publishing something as romance, you must have a female pseudonym, because that will make you very popular, because this particular setup, in this particular setup, you will be very popular because a woman writer, this is the early 20th century I am talking about. In this century, women writers are given some sort of extra space because of the kind of generation, because of the kind of tradition of the women writers that has been coming on. So Dean Koontz wrote as Diana Dwyer and Lee Nicholas. These two names were given by the publishers. They said that, okay, if you are writing in this genre, you use this, and if you are writing romance suspense, you use Lee Nicholas. That way you will be able to reach the audience. The audience will not know that the same person who wrote the romance suspense we love to read so much, is also writing Gothic horror. That way the audience mindset will also be at ease. The writer's mindset will also be at ease and the publisher will benefit from that profit. Next we have the name of Domenico Starnon. He wrote under the pen name of Elena Ferrante. Domenico is Italian, Elena Ferrante, that name is also Italian. He took it just for the sake that he did not want anybody to know who is writing those works, because there was opposition when he started writing his novels. Lastly, I would draw your attention to this particular cartoonist. This is a cartoonist, he really had a good sense of humor. Why I am saying that? Dav Pilkey, that is the name. He was writing the cartoon series of the Dumb Bunny. This cartoon series, when it was first published and hit the market, this series took the name of Sue Denim. People were very much keen who this Sue Denim is. But if you closely look at the name, you will find that the word Sue Denim, this particular word Sue Denim, is actually the broken up version of the word pseudonym. So, it is a kind of fun that he is arriving at when you see that a male author is actually taking the name of a female, is actually taking the female name, but is in fact trying to tell people that this is a pseudonym. So, there are various reasons for the male authors to take up female pseudonyms. So, just to make sure that we have all the reasons together, we will once again revise before we end this lecture today. The main purpose why the female authors chose male pseudonyms was to be accepted by a public who did not value the works of women. And the main purpose, and there is no main purpose for the male authors to take a female name. There are major purposes and minor purposes in case of the male authors. And one of the major purpose, I said that the male authors tried to gain the readership of female readers. They tried to tell people about the feminine side of men, wanted to show how emotional a man can be, and that will not be acceptable to the society if it is written by a man. The author will be discredited because the male authors are generally associated with the intellectual framework of the mind. So, in this lecture, we saw that name matters a lot. Whenever we talk about name of the author, when we hear the name, immediately we think that, oh, this is a male name, then the author, whatever he has written will be of grave political value, grave social value, and of course very witty. But whenever we hear that it is actually written by a woman, our mind is programmed, our consciousness is conditioned in such a way that we will start thinking, oh, it is written by a woman, it will only talk about household work, it will only talk about relationships, relationship of women with the husband, with the child, with the older relatives. It will only consider the inner circles of the house, it will not talk about the state, the government, the social evils, the cultural responsibilities and duties. Nothing will come into the narrative of the women's writing. So, we see that that is not the fact. And this lecture, you must have realized that even when women are writing, there is some kind of influence on the entire literature, entire works of literature that is being written right after that. Everybody has some sort of influence on the every writer has some kind of influence on the upcoming writers. Jane Austen, Elizabeth Gaskell, Frances Burney, Mary Shelley, to Virginia Woolf. Everybody in a certain way influenced the modern poetry, influenced the modern literature. And the modern literature went on to influence the postmodern and post-structuralist school of thoughts. So, if we see them as separate women's writing, we are making a mistake. We of course need to study them and study them for their own merit, but we must also consider their literature as a part of the entire literary body. Thank you very much. See you in the next lecture.
Understanding oneself, understanding others, understanding society at large, understanding the nature, these are all driven by basic human curiosity. We would all love to understand why things happen, what happens, what is the final outcome, why certain things fail. These are all exercises that we perform in various domains of knowledge. Therefore, knowledge in various domains, you would realize they are actually social artifacts. They have to be rooted into historical perspective, they have to be culturally salient, and there would be socio-political reasons behind this. Whether you talk with respect to engineering sciences, whether you talk with respect to physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, that is the reason why humanities and social sciences should be understood by all of us. The knowledge that is segregated, that is divided with respect to areas, specializations, all of them needs to be understood in its context. And what provides the context? It is the social reality. How do you correlate knowledge in a given domain with the cultural reality, with the social reality, with the socio-political compulsions? Okay, how do you understand the law of nature, okay, in its totality? And for doing that, you require the understanding of humanities and social sciences. Say for instance, if you are trying to understand the effect of a particular bacteria, a virus, any microbe, how it affects behavior, how it affects the organism, human being, you start looking at it from a pure biological point of view. If you are trying to look at a particular type of a wavelength, say for example, you are emphasizing on the understanding of the effect of radiation on human life, you are looking at things from a physical point of view. You are looking at the corresponding changes inside the body, you are looking at the physiological side of the understanding of the information. You are trying to understand why, despite knowing the risk that is inbuilt in the process, why still human beings engage into it. You are looking at it from a pure behavioral point of view. Why society at large admire things which has full of risk. You are trying to understand things from a pure sociological point of view. Why people use particular set of words to explain those experiences. You are trying to understand things from the linguistic point of view. So, there are a whole lot of things, and then finally, you try to combine all of them to say that what are the guiding principles in life. Then you say you are looking at life, you are looking at humanity from a pure philosophical point of view. And this is what social sciences courses provide you. They provide the context to you in which you would be finally positioning the understanding of the knowledge in any given domain. It could be engineering, it could be sciences, it could be medical sciences, it could be social sciences stuff, it could be humanities stuff. So, contextualizing the knowledge is what humanities social science courses help you obtain.